It's been a while. Trying something new today. So today, if you are an Asian living in North America, and for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to say Asian American here on out, although I mean more specifically Asians in Canada, and even more specific than that, Koreans in Canada. But if you're Asian, I guess if you're Asian Canadian, you've probably seen this video going around on social media today of a customer at TNT in Toronto, Ottawa, somewhere in Ontario. And yeah, it's just a racist dude who refuses to wear a mask, and he just kind of loses it on all these Asian people and becomes very racist. But I mean, you're shopping at a TNT, buddy, which is the stupidest thing that I've ever heard. So I don't know, you do you, I guess. But the main thing about the video was actually a lot of people were posting it and empathizing or pointing out the fact that the older gentleman, let's call him the grandpa, I guess, kept on saying that he's Canadian as well. And people interpreted this in their own different ways. Some people said, look at the anguish or hear the anguish in his voice. A lot of people, there's a lot of heartbreak or there's a lot of sadness out there in reaction to it. And I think there's a million ways we could take the conversation from here. There's a lot of factors that go into it, a lot of variables that come out of it and go into it. But there is definitely this idea of wanting to be accepted in what is Canadian. And I'm sure that this applies as well to the Asian diaspora. But anyways, got me thinking, what is Canadian? And what is community? What is acceptance? And I think these are all the questions that we should start with. I'm just gonna ramble a little bit, share some thoughts that I've had. And the one kind of the forefront of my mind is the one of acceptance and of cultural identity, because we kind of need labels, I think, in terms of finding a community, of finding like-minded individuals to really just share this cool thing we call life with. And in order to do that, labels actually help kind of narrow that down, I think, and whatever you identify with, because we're such community-driven beings, some cultures more than others, we have an inherent kind of need to find people that we vibe with. Growing up Canadian in a Korean household, though, it was very confusing. When you're a kid. When you're a kid, it's kind of a no-brainer, like, yeah, I'm Canadian. I was born here. You don't even think that you're born here. It's just you are Canadian. That's who you get along with. That's what you identify with. You're in Canada. You don't really know anything outside of your initial group or your little bubble. And especially if you're living in a smaller town like I was, you don't think beyond that. You don't seek anything beyond that. But clearly there was an issue because home life and the culture at home constantly clashed with school life. And even now, sometimes in work life or whatever, just anything that is not at home and not with Koreans. And Korean parents often try to instill cultural values in their kids by bringing them to these kind of gatherings of Koreans or putting them in extracurriculars with other Koreans or like Korean school. My mom even went and set up a Korean school in our town because they wanted to continue the culture. And I just found out today talking with my mom that my dad would get really pissed at me when I spoke English at home. I think not just the fact that I spoke English though, but the way that I spoke English. And this will come up in a future topic probably with internalized racism, but there's a very distinct way that's nearly intangible that, to put it bluntly, that white people use when speaking to Asian people. And there's a couple of different languages that I see in there. One is a very, patronizing tone and word choice and diction. The other one is kind of a power trip, like, hey, if I speak this level of English or this type of English, you're not going to follow along with my thoughts and or my argument and reasoning, and it's going to trip you up, and then I can kind of attack that and make you look stupid. But it's really a power dynamic of language. And I guess, and when I was a kid, I guess I was using that against my parents. And I know that I was definitely conscious of that fact, that I could get away with certain things if I used English and not Korean. And I was actually very resistant to even learning Korean when I was growing up. I remember distinctly in high school, I noticed these little trends in Korean culture in terms of hierarchy and respecting people who are older than you. And being that they're immature kids at that age, we're high schoolers, Koreans would take that to the next level. And even if you're a year younger, you have to bow like 90 degrees. And some people were worse than others, obviously, but some people took it to the extreme where if they felt that you were not bowing the full 90 degrees, they'd take you to the washroom, spit you out or something, I don't know. For guys, there'd be a lot of beatings and shit like that. So I remember in high school, I just never wanted to identify as Korean. I wanted to distance myself as far away as possible from that group so that I don't have to play by their rules. And I would always just say hi with a smile, throw my hand up, but never bow. And that worked at the time, for sure. And my friends were all, Canadian, growing up in a smaller town. Obviously, it's a little bit more white dominant, especially the school I was going to. So it was very easy to keep that distance. And it was very easy to fall into this mentality that I needed to be accepted by Canadian folk, that I needed to be one of them because that was my community. But I think there was always an underlying truth or awareness that you are not part of their culture completely, or at the very least, even if you're culturally with them, visually you're not. The way you look is not that. The way your parents act is not that. And for me, it began to become, I don't know, it was never really an issue, I guess. But it became a reality in university, I think, when I found other people who were like me, that were born here. And there were just certain intangible things that were points of connection between these people. And in hindsight, I think it was just, I could relate to them on certain specific things. The sense of humor was emerging as a very big thing. The type of media and the music that you consumed was becoming a big thing. So as that kind of grew, I began to realize that I've always felt alienated by Koreans just as much as, well, maybe not just as much. I felt more alienated by Koreans growing up. They would make it very clear that you're not one of them, you are a foreigner. And what I said about English could also easily apply to Korean. And I think Koreans don't do that though. They don't assert dominance through use of Korean because they're in an English-speaking country. But I think because Canadians, we do that, especially Canadian Asians, that becomes like a converse or an inverse relationship when we try to get along with Koreans. Every time I was forced in a position to speak Korean and I'm not confident in it, I felt very inferior and very uncomfortable, which led to further feelings of alienation and kind of disillusionment with the idea that I could become community or part of the Korean community. So you're not going to be accepted by Koreans, and then there's this budding realization that you're not quite fitting in with Canadians. And for me personally, it was very deep-rooted, I think, in humor, lifestyle, and down to very trivial things like food. Actually, food I think is big, but the way you party, the way you speak, I think, there's a lot of non-verbal cues, I think, and just a lot of, I don't know, it's just every little layer of social interaction has this tendril of, or has tendrils of links to culture, and Canadian culture wasn't fully resonating with me. And having that realization, it becomes confusing, because then you begin, I guess, assessing yourself or evaluating, okay, where does my Koreanness or influence from my parents, where does that begin? Where does being Canadian end? Or like, what can I attribute to Canadian culture? And you try to dichotomize this, and it's not even a word, I don't know. And it just doesn't work, because everybody is different. I'm sure my experience growing up, a lot of people can relate, but not completely. Everybody has a slightly different story. And for me, like, I grew up with my brother who has special needs, so then I have another element of that. And it's different. Everybody's different. Then there's the whole socioeconomic background, all that stuff. One example that came to mind for me was this idea of the Karen character. And I noticed that a lot of Asian parents do that too. And there's this question of, okay, funnily enough, actually, I gave the benefit of the doubt to white people when I was growing up, saying like, they don't do that. It's always the Korean parents that do that like try to suck up to teachers, try to like pamper them with gifts or blah blah blah, or like beg for grades and shit. And I mean, to a certain extent, it's true in Korean culture too, I think, and I saw it in a lot of the Korean parents here. But in hindsight, I saw that a fuck ton in the white community too. And yeah, like there's a lot of specific stories. There's a lot of stories too that my mom would tell me back in the day. And when I was in that mindset of like, I'm completely Canadian, I'm not Korean, then I would dismiss those and be like, Mom, you're tripping. Like, that's not a racial thing, or like whatever. Like, I don't know. I would always give white people the benefit of the doubt, essentially. Because Karens, I'm sure, have existed for much longer than these past couple of years. And I even asked my mom, like, yo, did you just learn some of the mannerisms from them and emulate it because you saw it working for them? And she said, nah. She thinks it's more of a universal thing, but to a certain extent, yeah, like she did see them doing it all the time. So I'm wondering, I don't know what the answer is for that. But those are the kind of internalizations you have growing up in this culture. And now that we're adults, or trying to adult, I guess, in my case, you're not, I don't know. I guess for some of us, we're still shocked that when we see these types of racists in society, but like, truth be told, I've always felt that. I've always felt that there's this low-key dismissiveness or feelings of superiority in the white people that I've hung out with. Not all of them, mind you, of course, but there is a certain level of dominance, I think, that comes with being the majority culture. Like, I won't be, I don't know, I try not to, I want to be sensitive with this, because I don't want to be like, oh, it's not a white person thing, it's a blah 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 thing. Like, some people try to change it into classism. Some people, like, I right now I'm trying to say that it's a majority culture thing, because I see racism in Koreans towards all sorts of groups, right? And I think it has to do with the majority power. But on the same token, I mean, white people, it's a thing, you know what I mean? So I don't want to dismiss that, but I do want to bring up the idea that perhaps if we are in the majority group, we wouldn't do much better, I guess, in terms of ethics, or in terms of these more subconscious feelings of superiority. Because even during this whole period with BLM and the sudden surge of wokeness, quote unquote, my God, what is the traffic today? That there's a very strong emphasis on things happening in North America, or the people that are, I don't know, like I see things happening in Hong Kong, for example, and a lot of the Asian Americans here don't give a shit about it, or like they don't know about it. And I think that's a majority superiority type thing that just manifests in a continental scale. So the point being, though, is that I think that leads to these very valid feelings of alienation, marginalization, feeling, persecuted almost, or just being painted as less than white people. And I definitely grew up always kind of having this reverence, I think, for white people, I guess. I don't know. But I did definitely feel like less attractive, less, definitely less athletic, because I'm not athletic. Less cool, less, I don't know, less something. And it never really manifested in a lack of confidence, though, or anything negative. So I think I lucked out in that department because I have a very big ego, I guess. I don't know. But it's kind of one of those facts that I'll probably be considered less attractive. I'll probably be passed up for this specific type of award or this specific type of position for somebody who is white. And culturally, I think we've reached a place where we're able to call that stuff out and people are upset by it. But honestly, even looking back, I'm not that upset by it. I don't know, it's weird. Although I do distinctly feel like there have been opportunities taken away from me or blocked. Perhaps it's because we have the BLM movement right now, and that's not appropriate to, I think, complain about as an Asian living in North America. But there will come a time, I think, where we will have to speak on that as well within our communities at the very least, or at least to bring it into the spotlight once Black lives finally matter. Long story short, I identify completely now as Korean Canadian, and back in 2014 or 15 or something, I really internalized that and really accepted that and really felt proud of that for the first time in my life. And I think that was rooted in the idea that I have been blessed to have grown up in constant conflict between two very conflicting cultures. Eastern ways of thinking and Western ways of thinking on the surface look very incompatible, and still I think they are very incompatible in many regards. But as a Korean Canadian, you kind of just make the best of it. You kind of have to navigate, you have to accept the fact that you are not at home in Korean culture or in Canadian culture. You are not one of them, and that is perfectly fine. I, for one, got so sick of trying to feel like I needed to be accepted as Canadian or Korean. There comes a point where you're just like, fuck it. Why the fuck do I have to try to make myself be part of this group when there is a group out there that looks like me, speaks like me, and grew up similar to me enough that we can really relate to each other and build our own communities. So in 2015, I was really trying to gun for that, to build a community for Korean Canadians, because I knew that there was a group of us out there, and I saw in university all these kids trying to fucking drink more than the white people, party harder, study harder, do more shit, just to be accepted. And I don't blame them. I think it's great, but no, I don't think it's great. I think it's fucking sad. And I think that we needed to have some sort of home base, some sort of baseline for Korean Canadians to really come together and realize that, hey, we have our own sort of language and culture. Nobody speaks Konglish better than us. You know what I mean? That is itself is a fucking hilarious language. The way that some people mix Korean and English for comedic effect is just mind-blowingly hilarious sometimes. But to understand that humor, you need to understand both cultures. And hopefully at the end of my life, I'll be able to see that community come together. I know we've made great strides as Asian Americans, but it's so quickly watered down. It's like, how long does it take for a culture to really find its footing and to become coherent? Not only coherent, but mature. Because I see that we're stereotyping ourselves and memeing ourselves, thinking that builds a foundation for culture. Like boba, I don't know when boba became a thing or synonymous with Asians. Animal Crossing seems to have done that too. Maybe not to the extent of boba though. And these movies that are coming out, which are fucking amazing, and I'm so thankful that they exist, but we have to champion just behind those for now. So there's such a limited space and cognitive arena, I think, in the discussions for bicultural identity. Everything is so watered down right now, and I think justifiably so, because we need to get everybody on the same page and make these baby steps. But it's very fucking infuriating to see these notions and these questions or these discussions taking place today that I was talking about 5 years ago, and I'm imagining people who are older than me have been talking about this shit for even longer than that. So it's like, when the fuck do we progress then? How long does it take? I'm ranting. So that's why I've given up a little bit. Because honestly, I also attribute that to, like, Korean Canadians are very, very different from Chinese Canadians or Vietnamese Canadians, Taiwanese Canadians. We're all so different. Filipino Canadians, can't forget them. And honestly, a lot of other Asian Canadians. We're not very coherent. We're very different. And that's why it's so difficult, I think, to try to build a community that is for Asian Canadians. I missed my exit. God, where am I going? I think the point I'm trying to say is that I really feel for that gentleman, especially because he's older and he's probably lived his entire life trying to get along with Canadians or to be accepted by them, and there does, I guess, seem to be elements of shock that he faced by the racism. But if I were to be very blunt, I'm not that surprised, I think is what I'm trying to say, and I'm pretty okay with it. Like, I'm not okay with the racism part. I'm not okay with the guy that was being racist. I think he's a fucking piece of shit, garbage, trash motherfucker, but I'm not shocked. And I'm not shocked because I have a very strong sense of identity as a Korean Canadian. I don't fucking care whether or not Canadians think I'm Canadian. And I'll be the first one to be like, I'm not fully Canadian. I don't know if that's going to lead to more conflict. Like, Canadians will be like, get out of this country then, and you don't completely blah, blah, blah. But it's like, how the fuck can you, is my question. I don't know. I can't fathom the idea that, like, I can't. I'm constantly exposed to Korean culture, constantly exposed to multiple cultures living in Vancouver and Surrey and I guess lesser in Abbotsford, but now Abbotsford. How can I just be completely Canadian? And there's a lot of questions of, what does that even mean? What does being purely Canadian mean? Because everybody has different upbringings. I did a podcast episode with Jackie, and him growing up in Surrey was a very different experience from me growing up in Abbotsford. So it's a very watery definition. But the thing is, if you are of a different culture, if you identify as any other culture, you begin to see, or you just kind of know, like, that is most likely a Canadian thing. That is most likely a white mentality too. Sometimes you can differentiate from that and that. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's enough of a rant. If you found this, jeez, I don't know how to do an outro. If you want to talk, hit me up. I'm very passionate about this stuff. I really want to get my shit together so I can figure out a way to really contribute to my community because I still don't think we have a community. I still think we're a very immature group that needs a lot of work. And I see a lot of people who have, I don't know. See, that's the other thing too, where I don't think there's a person that can really speak for me as a Korean Canadian. Although I really respect and will support people who are at the forefront of the Asian American thing. But at the end of the day, it's still different, I think. So I don't know. God, that was a lot of talking.